Welcome back. Tonight we're looking at saving lessons for the so-called sandwich generation. It's estimated that 1 in 4 South Africans pay what we call here the black tax. This is similar to those in the sandwich generation around the world who are obliged to support parents who've not saved enough for retirement, while some also have to support children who are leaving home later. Well, ABSA says there's only one way to ensure the phenomenon is not passed on to the next generation, and that's through savings. To discuss, we're joined by the bank's head of savings and investments, Tommy Lele. Thank you for joining us, Tommy.
Thank you.
So to what extent is being part of the sandwich generation holding people back from being free economically?
Francis, it really is a challenge in some respects, purely because you are looking to progress in life, and you then of course have to look back and say, my family, my mother, as an example, and my child, need to be taken care of. And there's also that communal pressure, to be able to be seen as well, to be doing the right thing. But at the same time, you want to do it, so within the means that you're sitting with, but it becomes a challenge, in any case.
Is it... Can it make us feel better, at least, that this isn't a South African phenomenon alone? I think you were looking at some of the research, and it's globally people are talking about this sandwich generation. I mean, in China, I've heard of those, one kid households, and they now have to look after the 2 parents, the aging generation. So at least we're not alone.
We're not alone. I mean, I think if you look at the term sandwich generation, was coined in 1981 by Dorothy Miller in the US. As an example. So it tells you that
quite a while ago.
It's a while back, and it's been a phenomenon that's been going on. I think in South Africa the context starts to shift, so because the sandwich generation is looking at the child as well as the parent. You are in between. In South Africa, you start to look at more extended families, as well. Your sister's child, if you need to look after them as well. The school fees that you need to pay for them when they go out to school, and also your child themselves and yourself, of course, so because you want to progress, so it is a much wider and much more impactful situation in South Africa as well.
And this was interesting to me, that 25% of South Africans are believed to sort of have this burden. That's 1 in 4. Do you think that's increasing pressures, maybe even around fees must fall, say?
So there's definitely are pressures. I mean, I think pressures both in terms of ensuring that the debt levels that are experienced in the country, by the same person that is looking after these 2 people, because at some point debts become a consuming challenge. But at the same time, being from ABSA and having the view that says we are wanting to help customers achieve their goals in the right way, and this is where we feature, as a savings and investment within ABSA, and we're saying we are in a position, to assist in various ways.
Well, you are saying that to ensure this doesn't pass on to the next generation, people have to save. They have to save for their own retirement so as not to be a burden on their children. Is that basically?
And that's exactly the point. I mean, I think the point is it's either you become part of the cycle, or you look forward to making sure that for your children that cycle is not there. That generational sandwich generation issue that's going to continue to spiral. So you probably need to make that decision, and it really is a tough decision, to make, to saying I either look for myself as well, but at the same time for my family. But how about my child? Do I want him to feel the same way and be experiencing the same things when they are the ones who are working? Maybe it is now to actually start and plan for that, that long term.
Maybe a lot of people think, well, they deserve it. I have to look after everybody.
Well, that's true. I mean, I think you want to deserve it. And I think because you've raised this child,
I guess.
You've raised this child, and you're expecting, and there's an expectation that they will have to look after you as well. But at the same time, as the child that is expected to look after your parents, which is the right thing to do, I would imagine, especially because if you don't do it, who else is going to do it? But at the same time, you need to make that decision. You need to split your decisions around what is short term, what is medium term, and long term. So for yourself as well as for a child. And also, I think the one thing that is important is also making sure that when you make this decision, your child themselves, you start teaching them how to save. you start teaching them how
That's
to focus
important,
on money and focus on how to manage their finances. Because once you've done that, the reality is that they will grow up with that, and at some point that cycle will break.
How do you tell people who are supporting parents, children, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings that now they need to find the money to save? It's very difficult.
It's difficult. I mean, I think, with difficult situations, it requires difficult decisions, and I think
and sacrifices.
And sacrifices, So I think when you look at it in that way, is that yes, money will be a challenge, that your salary might struggle to make you reach the next salary paycheck. It's a true reality, but I think you have to make a tough one, and you don't have to start big. You can start small. So we have a product that we call TrueSave as an example. You can start with 50 Rand, just to save, and put that money over time. The impact will be quite powerful. It's just for you to make that decision, and the confidence of saving as you see the results, the benefit behind it, you will actually benefit out of it, as an individual.
I don't want to punt any products, but I am interested in what you're seeing around stokvels. We often talk about that on this show, and the problem has been that there's been a short-term mindset, for groceries and things like that. Are you seeing that shifting, or is it still a long way off where people start to maybe use these tools and their clubs to think about retirement?
Well, so I think stokvels is a very important vehicle for changing the culture of saving. It's a very critical vehicle, and I think what it does is if you're struggling to save as an individual because you're struggling to make that decision, or the willpower is not necessarily there. When you get yourself into a group saving, the nice thing about it, or the powerful thing around it, is that you almost feel the pressure from someone else, because you don't want to be embarrassed that you're not contributing. You also want somebody to hold you accountable. And that's, I think, is a power, besides the social element to it, but it's also the power of making sure that you are continuing to contribute. In no time, you will find yourself having saved quite enough. And then also maybe just in that, around the stokvel environment, is that you will have the short-term ones, those who save for groceries, as an example. So they're saving to make sure that they take advantage of the bulk the discounts. Then you have those who also save because they're saving for the future. They put it in, and I think that's why even the government supports, the culture of saving through introducing the tax-free savings accounts, which is effectively geared to a long-term savings and making sure that you stick to your saving culture at the same time as well.
And I like that you've brought up willpower. I've heard that it takes willpower, so you can use social pressure or that idea of paying yourself first, taking a debit order so you don't even look at the money, things like that.
And I think it's a valid point that you're raising, and it's very important. That this debit order example is that sometimes when you have to remember every time to make this contribution, you'll always find a reason not to do it. Whereas if it's in a debit order form, that it's moving, and you're not looking at it, and it's done, and you can look back. And when you look back, actually, you're saying, oh my goodness, have I saved so much? I didn't realize. And that's where the confidence that I talk about comes in, because you've realized that you've done so much, and you want to continue with that, as well.
Finally, we're heading to bonus time. So I guess, what is your advice to the sandwich generation if you're going to get a windfall?
Let's not get carried away. Let's make sure that with this lump sum that you are going to be getting, it is money that you've worked for very hard. You are in a position to make a better decision as well. Try and make sure that you split that. So maybe save some of it. We're not saying be frugal and not have the joys of working, but what we're saying is be responsible. Think of tomorrow. Think of the emergencies that might happen. Think of the goals that you're saving for as well. And save towards that. And when you're saving for a goal and you gem jar, as we usually call these things, what you find is that you actually get to stick to that savings behavior, as well,
so
which is important.
Just start the precedent.
And start.
Thank you so much for your good advice, Thami Nxele from ABSA for us this evening. Now let's move further afield. European Central Bank President Mario Draghi says the Eurozone economy should continue to improve slowly, with inflation creeping up in coming months.